So the first awakening experience, in the way that I frame the map of Zen awakening, is Kensho, which just means seeing one's true nature, or seeing things as they are, something like that. And many people will start with experiencing Kensho in a very momentary basis, or a very flash experience. And this builds over time. Part of it is we're developing trust in putting down the sense of self, experiencing absence of self. We're learning to let go and make contact with the love of the Absolute, the pure love that's there. We're learning all these things. We're learning nothing bad is happening. It's safe. So our sense of survival, our survival instinct, gets more and more relaxed and understands that it's not going to mean that this body or mind die. There's going to be a de-emphasis of those, but they're not going to permanently go away. For me as a Zen teacher, a student has to demonstrate the three components I mentioned earlier: absence of self, recognition of true identity, and the universal love, or the oneness. The majority of people that have Kensho experiences, they have the experience of the unmanifest. That's the entry, the portal. So the no self, the absence of self, opens into the unmanifest absolute, and at some point the love and presence quality of the manifest absolute is experienced too. So the whole of the absolute is experienced. A smaller percentage of people enter through the love, through the unity, through the present side. It does happen, but it's just not a high percentage of people. I don't think there's anything wrong with it being experienced that way. I just don't see it that often. So when we have the experience of Kensho, part of what happens in the absence of self is our self-identity becomes transparent. We can't see it, we can't experience it in the moment that our awareness and consciousness are deeply experiencing the Absolute. So there isn't a sense, I'm doing this. There isn't a me driving it or organizing it. There's no personality involvement. Again, this is happening with consciousness and awareness. And sometimes in the Zen tradition, we'll talk about depth of Kensho, or depth of awakening. That's really pointing to how long the sense of self is suspended before it re-engages or begins to re-engage. Where I mentioned some Kensho can be a moment or two. The more deep experience would probably, the sense of self, the absence of self, would be present for weeks, if not months, before the sense of self begins to reassert itself with any strength. And we're going to be changed by the Kensho experience. So when the sense of self arises again, it's not quite the same. Some dysfunction, some misunderstandings we hold will fall away because we've experienced the truth. We know that particular opinion wasn't accurate. That perspective wasn't accurate. And so that's what we talk about the depth. Within awakening, I also use a term, the 51% rule. Let me first mention I identify three significant stages of awakening. Kensho is initial awakening. In Japanese Zen, any awakening can be called Kensho. It's just a term meaning awakening. A deeper awakening in the map that I present and teach is called Satori. And the difference between Kensho and Satori is the 51% rule. An initial awakening can be a Satori awakening. That does happen in a small percentage of people who experience Kensho. The 51% rule means that how much of consciousness has realized itself as the Absolute, meaning the Absolute awakens to itself in an awakening experience. So how much of the individual consciousness does that awakening land in? And it can be really any percentage, but it seems to be that once it's the majority of consciousness is awake, then what happens is the foundation, the sense of this is fundamentally who I am, shifts from the sense of self, the normal sense of self that everyone in the world holds. It shifts to true nature. It shifts to the qualities of the Absolute in you. So in your consciousness, it's like there are these gems, and I've talked about them being like holograms, where if the right concentration energy is directed to these gems, then they can reveal the whole of the Absolute. But we're not in contact with the wholeness of the Absolute, the fullness of it, as a base inner sense. So we can touch in, we can feel the qualities of the Absolute in our experience, in our sense of self. It's sort of tied up into that. And so that would be the Satori experience, when the foundation shifts. And it never shifts back. As long as one maintains meditation practice, that foundation remains. And there's one level that's a little deeper than the Satori. The third significant awakening in the Zen map is called Daigotete, which means final or full awakening. And I always say when I give that definition that it isn't really final in the sense that there's no further awakenings or realizations to happen. Those continue forever. As long as one is practicing, the awakenings can continue. There's no end to the mystery that can be revealed in the Absolute. The Daigotete, two significant events happen with that realization. In the normal framing of the development of the identity, the way that the map that I use for that, the development of the sense of self, is one where the infant is born into a dual unity, into a oneness of presence. It doesn't see and experience itself as a distinct being. It believes it's part of the whole. The caregiver and the baby, from the infant's perspective, are one. Over time, the baby recognizes that need comes from within. Pain is felt within. Hunger, a need for affection, those are all from within. And the baby begins to see the solution, the satisfaction of these needs comes from outside, from another. So the baby concludes, I don't have the solutions. I can't satisfy these needs, these hungers, these hurts. I need the other. And so that begins differentiating the baby into an individual sense of self. And also the baby turns away from the presence of the Absolute to invest in the caregiver. My survival depends upon these people. I have to keep them connected to me. And so this begins the sense of self. And it's developed based on thoughts, thought patterns. I talked about the preferences, likes and dislikes. That's part of how we form identity, and also how we're mirrored by caregivers, in school, social situations. That just paints who we are to us. And then we begin to maintain it. When somebody sees all the things we feel are good in us, then we feel seen. They get us. If someone mirrors us inaccurately, then we think they don't get us. They're not someone who I want to be close with. They don't understand me. So we perpetuate the self-identity as we move through life. And when the baby turns away from the unity with presence of the Absolute, Each of us blames ourselves. Something is wrong with me, or I wouldn't have been kicked out of presence. I would still be intimate with presence. But we were the ones that chose to turn to the birth family, the caregivers, invest in them. And so we turned away and we blamed the Absolute. It kicked me out because I'm flawed, because I have this problem, this worthlessness within, what I call the core wound. And the personality is constructed on the core wound to hide it, to distract others' attention away from the sense of valuelessness, worthlessness, unlovability, bad, broken, unfixable, all of that. And so in the Daigo Teitei realization, in the process of the Kensho and Satori experiences, we do a lot of personal work because the realization highlights whatever's not matching, whatever's incongruent with the realization, with the understanding from the realization. So we're constantly working our personal material, refining who we are, becoming a better and better vessel for the Absolute. And that's when the Daigo Teitei realization can happen, when we're ready to resolve the core wound. We're ready to go into it, to find out what's true about it, and to drop what's false. And in the Daigo Teitei realization, the reason it's called the final enlightenment is because the sense of self falls away and doesn't return. I only know a handful of people, maybe 5 or 6, that have had this experience. I've had a couple students have the experience, and I have a couple that are working on this realization. It's approaching. So it is happening. It's just very rare because you have to work through a lot of the personal material, and many people aren't willing to work and move into that deep vulnerability. The question, maybe I am worthless, maybe I am broken, unfixable. That's what we have to be willing to witness by working this material. And so those are the 3 realizations in the map of the Zen tradition.